Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anita Desai, and I am the Executive Director of St. Leonard's Society of Canada. I'll uh, I'll get us started off first here with the acknowledgement that SLSC is located in Ottawa on traditional unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, and the 10-member organizations that our national network are comprised of are also located on various traditional unceded lands across the country, as are many of you who are gathering alongside us today from places that are home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Acknowledging this reminds us that we live, work, and collaborate both in person and virtually as a result of the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. So welcome and a little bit about our organization in case you're not familiar with us. St. Leonard's Society of Canada is a national membership-based organization bringing together a network of individuals and organizations to collectively address the needs of people involved in the criminal justice system, beginning with supportive housing. We work together to advocate for safer, healthier, and more inclusive communities. Our purpose as an organization is to promote humane and informed criminal and social justice policy, practice, and responsible leadership to foster safer communities. And what better way to do that today than being with all of you for our conversation on the federal framework to reduce recidivism? So before getting into today's webinar, I do want to make a couple of housekeeping notes. Please know, hopefully you'll have caught the notification when you logged in with us today that our webinar is being recorded and it will be shared publicly afterwards. If you wish to remain anonymous, you can change your display name and you can turn off your camera during the session if you feel that's important to you to do so. And I'm going to flag down the members of our team. We've got Danielle Khoury and Roshana Rana, who are available as well. If you need some support, please feel free to send them a message in the chat directly or to everyone. We'll do our best to support you through any challenges with navigating Zoom. So this webinar is the first in our new Community Connections webinar series that will take place monthly until next summer. This work was made possible by the dedicated efforts of Roshana, who worked really hard this past summer to make our vision for this series a reality. So I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to Roshana. The vision really for these webinars was to promote public education and awareness with key actors to advance humane and informed criminal and social justice policies and practices. So throughout this series, we're going to have various guest speakers that will explore what's working, what's possible, and what still needs to change on key social and criminal justice issues, particularly those that are relevant to the federal framework to reduce recidivism. So I'm as eager as the rest of you for me to be quiet and to hear what Catherine has to share with us. So the final thing I will say is about why we felt it was important to have a webinar series that was largely grounded in the federal framework to reduce recidivism. So over the past 5 years, I've had the opportunity alongside many of my colleagues who also work in sort of national associations active in criminal justice to do a deeper dive into the federal framework and sort of as it became established in legislation and in supporting its implementation with colleagues like Catherine, who were engaged by the Department of Public Safety for our insights on what it would take to have this mark what we were referring to as a paradigm shift in community safety and well-being. In my experience, no one has been a more vocal advocate for meaningful implementation of the federal framework to reduce recidivism than my friend and colleague, Catherine Latimer, who is our guest speaker for today. Together, we will discuss and critically evaluate the implementation for the framework. Catherine will provide us with an overview, after which you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions, and some of you asked some questions in advance, so we've got those handy as well, and we'll do our best to get to all of those. You can use the raise hand function, use your real hand and wave it around, and we'll do our best to spot you. Or you can just put your question in the chat, and our team will do our best to moderate those questions with the time that's available to us today. So without further delay, I am delighted to introduce Catherine Latimer, Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Canada.
Thank you very much, Anita. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk about the federal framework to reduce recidivism. Some of you had the opportunity to ask some questions in advance, and one of the questions was what hope I had that the federal government would actually act on this. And I think the more public awareness there is, the more attention there is to it, the more likely it is that the government's going to take this opportunity seriously and act on it. So all opportunities for everybody to get out there and trumpet the federal framework to reduce recidivism, I think, is a very good thing. And I'm really pleased to be able to talk about it here. So I have a deck. This is so I sort of keep on point. And Daniel Khoury is going to help me get through this deck. The introductory slide, I think, has pretty much been covered off. So why I think it's important is that the federal framework to reduce recidivism is one of the few positive things that I think we can see in the foreseeable future relating to the criminal justice agenda and this government. Now, granted, it was put forward by a conservative backbencher, but it was fully endorsed by all parties, and the existing government has some real responsibility for it. So I see it as quite a positive thing. It has great potential, but it really has not been utilized up to its full potential. And I think by leveraging the federal framework to reduce recidivism, we can better support individuals who are reintegrating, and hopefully that will lead to safer communities and will be beneficial to everybody. So that's why we're here. The next slide deals with John Howard Society. So I'm the executive director of the John Howard Society, which is basically an organization where we all advocate for effective, just, and humane responses to the causes and consequences of crime. But basically, it is our affiliate offices that are located throughout Canada. We serve in all provinces and one territory, and we provide services in about 60 communities that try to support reintegration and prevent people who are justice involved from getting into any further problems with the law. So we are a federated organization with provincial and local affiliates who provide services directly in their communities, which includes the reintegration support. We've been active nationally since 1962, and with provincial roots going back to 1867. So we've been around for a long time. Our mandates have kind of changed a little bit, but certainly a focus on prisoners and successful reintegration is core mandate for the John Howard Society. Next slide. Okay, so there are a significant number of barriers to improving recidivism, to improving measures to prevent recidivism. I think would be a better way of phrasing that. But there is not a lot of support. Prisoners are released with little to no support to help them successfully reintegrate into the communities. It used to be that they would get a lot more support. What you're finding are parole officers probably are overworked and overwhelmed, and they don't provide the kind of positive coaching, positive reinforcement role that they used to provide for prisoners and former prisoners. So insufficient support is a real problem. Homelessness, as Anita sort of alluded to, insecure housing is a real problem. So our numbers suggest that 20 to 30% of those, approximately 18,000 a year, experience homelessness within 2 years of release. And that really creates an unstable environment and predisposes them to lapse back into criminal activity. Interrupted health care is a problem. Federal prisoners are not covered by provincial health plans, and delays in getting coverage upon release disrupt their treatment and cuts off their supply of medication. They're also on huge, long waiting lists to get family doctors, and it takes a long time for them to get the much needed health care that they need. Employability and education. So prisoners have limited access to education and employment training in prison that could help them later find work. Education has moved online, and prisoners don't really have access to the internet and opportunities to access educational opportunities that the rest of us have. Positive support networks. The role of non-government organizations, community organization, peers, and others who link with those leaving prisons, or link people leaving prisons with pro-social supports, are not adequately valued or supported. I mean, many of us, I think, who are watching this are engaged in activities that are trying to improve the lot of those who are leaving prisons and coming into communities. And that work is not adequately funded. It's not adequately respected. And, you know, you're working with a population that is generally feared by the public and disliked by the public for what they did. So you've got a lot of strikes against you. And, you know, I rejoice that there are so many people who are picking up that challenge, but it's hard sledding. It's hard sledding without a lot of support for it. And a big problem is measurement. So there is no, right now, there is no standardized method for measuring recidivism in Canada. So recidivism generally means committing another crime or offense within a certain period of time after leaving prison. So there are many variables on what that could include. There are some good definitions of for measuring recidivism, and there are some that are not extremely useful. So it is hard to know whether or not we're succeeding in reducing recidivism, and the framework is intended to reduce recidivism if there are no adequate measures that are being applied to that. And that's something I'm going to bring up later on, but it's a problem. All of these are problems, and the framework to reduce recidivism really gives some hope that there will be a focus on some of those key elements as we move ahead. So the next slide, what the federal government has done has indicated 5 pillars for successful reintegration. And that was, I'll get into the timelines for responding and putting the federal framework to reduce recidivism in place. But I think many of us would agree that these are important elements that should, depending on the individual, should be cultivated to support their reentry back into the general population. So housing is a key one. The prisoners that I've worked with are very anxious about where they're going to live, particularly if they're coming out at warrant expiry. And oftentimes there's not much for them except a last minute residential placement thanks to the parole board that they hadn't really planned for when they're coming out at stat release. So the housing situation is dire. Employment prospects are tough. There's a real prejudice against hiring people with criminal records generally, but with who have been formerly incarcerated. It's a significant challenge. There's also some concerns about the continuity of healthcare, which we mentioned, and the positive social support networks and getting adequate education. So the 5 pillars, I think they're a very strong basis on which to build a framework. So we're happy generally with the pillars. Now we get into the timelines of the federal framework's implementation. So it was conservative backbencher Richard Bragdon who tabled Bill C-228, which was a private member's bill that was arguing for a framework to reduce recidivism. Now, he had contacted the John Howard Society sometime before this to seek advice. Actually, it was his parliamentary advisor who had sought advice from us on the framework, and we were happy to help, support those efforts. Now, normally, private members' bills are not passed, so they languish and then they die when parliaments are recessed and whatnot. But this one, it moved up the ladder to being introduced, and it had sufficient support from all parties that it passed, which was great. And the bill required, the bill, when it was passed, became the Reduction of Recidivism Framework Act. And it required the Minister of Public Safety to come up with a strategy or a plan or a framework for this initiative within a year. So we were all sitting on the edge of our seats waiting to see whether or not the federal government would actually come up with a framework. And what they did was they came up with the pillars, which was good, but then they asked for another year to discuss implementation of the framework. And so many of us were consulted on how to implement this, which is fine. So it wasn't until 2023 that the implementation plan for the federal framework was actually launched. one of the things that I really like about the bill, and that I want to draw your attention now, but I will come back to it later, is that it has required reporting requirements. And so within 3 years, or at the 3-year mark, the Minister of Public Safety is to report back to Parliament on the effectiveness of the federal framework to reduce recidivism. And I think that's extremely important. And then after that, they have to respond annually to progress that has been made. I'll get back to that because I think what John Howard has been doing is encouraging parliamentarians who have an interest to ask certain questions about what's in that report back to Parliament based on the legislative requirements. And I'll just recap and say that much more needs to be done to implement the federal framework to reduce recidivism. And I was just going through elements of the Reduction of Recidivism Framework Act that seem to be required elements in the federal framework, which I think many of us would like to ensure that they remain components and we actually see some movement on those. So I went through the top 3. The next ones are review and implement international best practices. So they were supposed to review international best practices and look to see if some of those could be applied in the Canadian context. And they were supposed to evaluate and improve risk assessment tools. And this one was added by the government of the day, address cultural and racial bias, all of which are good, but not all of which we have seen as products so far coming out of the federal framework to reduce recidivism. So the next slide deals with federal levers to support the federal framework. So initially I'm going to go through various departments and indicate other federal departments that have a mandate that connects with those 5 pillars and whether or not they have been encouraged to support the government priority of the federal framework to reduce recidivism. But first, let me say that provincial and municipal governments, let me just roll back a bit. Provincial and municipal governments have key roles in supporting services that reduce repeat crime. So the John Howard Society, because we have offices that deal with provincial governments across the country, our strategy has been, if you ask them to support the implementation of the federal framework to reduce recidivism, they'll say, well, the federal government hasn't given us any money. They show us the money, we'll show the support. But they're doing this stuff anyway. So our strategy has been to really give praise and credit where we see provincially funded programs that are encouraging and supporting any of the elements of the federal framework. So not necessarily linking it directly to the federal framework, but linking it to recidivism reduction efforts that are valued and that we are grateful for. We do think, okay, that CSC and NPB do have capacity to reduce recidivism. Whether they're maxing out their efforts or not is another question. And the following slides indicate federal support, other federal support potentially for the federal framework to reduce recidivism. So, pardon me. The Department of Public Safety does have a slightly broader mandate than corrections per se, which includes crime prevention programs, and recidivism prevention really falls within some tertiary grounds of preventing reoffending. So certainly we perceive that some of the crime prevention resources could be used to support the federal framework to reduce recidivism. They've got Building Safer Communities funding and contributions to policy development. Now, many of us have received funding, gratefully received funding from the Policy Development Fund to test out certain pilots. But very rarely are any of the pilots that we have tested and think work well picked up on an ongoing basis. But contributing to policy development, I think, is really important in this area so that we test certain things out. They also have agencies beyond that, like the RCMP, Canada Border Service, and whatnot, that have mandates that relate directly to public safety, and they could be engaged too in a constructive and a positive way. Okay, the next slide deals with the housing mandate. The housing mandate is a big one, as Anita pointed out, because a lot of money has been poured into increasing housing affordability and chronic homelessness. They have initiatives under various housing accelerator funds and urban and rural and northern indigenous housing strategies, all geared to increasing the housing supply. So we think it's really important to try and leverage some of those resources to this particular group of need. So I think we need to really try and do that. And I think that should be part of the federal framework to reduce recidivism as well. The next department is the government's employment mandate. They have a lot of resources that are focused on improving training and employment opportunities for diverse groups. I will also point out that Prime Minister Carney has indicated that building Canada is an important element of protecting our sovereignty and dealing with the the fallout from the tariff trade issues. And providing training for those in custody who could have the skill set upon release to participate even before there's lots of opportunities with Corcan and others to participate in the building of Canada and the production of what's needed to support Canadians through this difficult period in our history. We should really get on that and make sure that they're aware that this is a potential labor pool that could really help if the training and supports were in place. So I think that's one where we can really make some inroads. The next one is the health mandate. So the Department of Health is supposed to be enhancing public health system through partnerships with provinces, which is fine. John Howard Society has a real beef with the Canada Health Act exclusion of only federal prisoners from gaining access to universal healthcare protections under the Canada Health Act. So federal prisoners are an excluded class, defined as those who are not included as insured persons under the Canada Health Act. I see no reason for that. And it would really, I think, improve and ease transition back to the community. We're looking at it particularly for those who are in palliative care situations where, anyway, there are some real hurdles with this designation and not having immediate access to healthcare, which impedes access to the type of healthcare services that are available in the community for people who need them. So that's something that we're fighting on another front, but that would really help. There's supposed to be increasing investments in primary and virtual care, mental health services, and improving long-term care and long-term care quality and availability. So many of our prisoners are really aging behind bars. They're not getting the kind of services that other senior Canadians would get in terms of their health care, including, the requirement that seniors' homes be air conditioned. I mean, it's way too hot for them anyway, it's a mess in the federal prison system. So we think that they should be looking at supporting this as well. And they put an emphasis on data-driven, comprehensive healthcare approach that supports all Canadians. Okay, so I would argue that that would include our group as well, and we need to get on that. Make sure that that's fun. Mental health and addictions mandate. Okay, so it is there's a growing problem, in my view, with people who have substance abuse problems who are ending up in federal custody. Also, those who have mental health issues who are ending up in federal custody. So just as a sidebar, the Mental Health Commission of Canada is going to be releasing its action plan on the criminal justice system soon. So we're hoping that they will have some really strong recommendations that will support better mental health and addictions support for prisoners. or those involved in the criminal justice system generally. We think there needs to be a comprehensive, or this is their mandate, they need to develop comprehensive strategies for mental health standards and substance use, address health inequities, and there are significant health inequities for our people who are not protected by the Canada Health Act. I'm talking now about federal prisoners. And they're supposed to have a mandate to support mental health across diverse populations, which is interesting. So I don't know what they're doing. I will say that in another initiative, I was talking to a former Deputy Minister of Justice who was also a former Deputy Minister of Health. And in that capacity, he had visited a lot of federal prisons, including Kingston Penitentiary at the time. So, you know, there is some mandate there that at least some of the people at the Department of Health are taking seriously, which we should try and explore and see if we can get some more action there. So, Department of Justice mandate. Okay, so they're supposed to be ensuring equitable access to justice, focusing on modernizing the criminal justice system, supporting victims of crime. Now, it's their definition of victims of crime. We all know that a lot of prisoners themselves are both perpetrators and victims of crime, but the scope of victim support doesn't extend that far, and perhaps that more can be done for prisoners, many of whom are suffering from PTSD and other problems as a result of their victimization and what they've been exposed to in prisons. And one of my favorites was this is Section 4. The Department of Justice is supposed to be ensuring that public administration conforms with the law. So in my books, that means that the Corrections and Conditional Release Act should be being administered, and the Corrections and Conditional Release Act should be being administered in conformity with that law by both the Correctional Services of Canada and a Parole Board of Canada. And we see some problems there. So it would be nice to get that fixed as well. Okay, now I'm going to look at opportunities to do more. Okay, one of the big problems that I see is if you're going to have a year-over-year ongoing strategy, the purpose of which is to reduce recidivism, you have no idea of knowing whether or not you're achieving any results unless you have a capacity to measure whether you're seeing reductions in recidivism. I would have thought that establishing some baseline data, a baseline year is key. And many of us would like to see not just, grosso modo data, but more granular data, like are people released on statutory release more likely to reoffend than people who are released on full parole? Are people who are released on, are there special needs of those who are being released at warrant expiry, who are getting no support on their reintegration path? So I think there are, and I've talked to some people, Anita being one of them, about how you measure recidivism. And I'm going to be frank about this. There's no really excellent answer. There's benefits and detriments to just about every measure. My view is let's just pick one and stick with it so we have some baseline or some capacity to measure whether we're making progress on this initiative or not. So I'd rather have something that was flawed that we could apply consistently than nothing in the hopes that eventually we'll get something perfect. So I think we need to really work on that. For the reasons that I pointed out there. Okay, funding housing. Again, this is a major, major, major problem. Okay, so we know that this is circular, right? Those that are unhoused are more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. Those that come out and are unhoused are more likely to come back into the criminal justice system. Having some stable housing is a really important stabilizing force and stabilizing feature for people who are trying to turn their lives around. If they don't have a place to go that is safe, they tend to go back to the people they know who, knew them before they may have embarked on a path of reform. and it makes life a lot harder for them. And I would say housing, because there's money out there for housing, it seems like it's ripe for the picking. Now, I say that, but we all know that, you know, if you're looking at housing for battered women or housing for people who are coming out of prison, you know, you're up against some very important needs. And we're going to have to fight pretty hard to make sure that our group is in there. But if they're serious about combating crime, then this is a key element of combating crime, I think, and one that is worth the investment. Okay, the next slide deals with investing in reintegration support. Now, I think they do need to establish and test community-based reintegration programs that will help people pre and post release. So I think a lot of organizations that work in the area here would like to have much better in-reach, much better possibility of building connections with people who are coming out. So you know what you're getting when they're coming to your CRFs. You know what you're getting. You're starting to cultivate or encourage an opportunity for them to come to your local office in the community if they're needy, to get linked up with community resources that can help them. And you do that by building bridges to them. And I think that the lack of transition support is a problem now. I don't think that there is nearly enough emphasis being placed on those bridges back into the community. And far too many people are coming out at stat release because they have to come out at stat release without having completed a suite of programs in the prison or being connected with the support structure in the community that they're going to that could provide them with support. I think that there should be an investment, given that Prime Minister Carney is looking for investments or reinvestment, maybe away from some of the CSC resources that are not being well used here, to some of the organizations in the community who could really do a good job at supporting those who are coming out and are doing a good job on the limited resources that they have. But if they had more resources, they could do a lot more. And I think we really need to push for that. You know, if we could support the completion, what I really don't like, is for people, because they have not completed their programs, not to get access to the parole board. If the paroling authority decides you're high risk or your risk can't be managed in the community, that's one thing. But for people to lose the opportunity to get to a paroling hearing because they haven't had the suite of programs that they need and are not being supported by CSC doesn't strike me as being fair. And if we could be delivering those programs in the community, that would be a lot better. I think that would get people to their parole board hearings a little faster and give them some measure of hope that those that are ready and willing and trying to get their lives together could get the support they need in their community and aren't 100% reliant on CSC delivering those programs to them. So I think investing in reintegration support, which includes in-reach into the prisons and building those networks and plans, is really important. And I think we should be pressing for that as a way of reducing recidivism. Next slide, skilled trades training. I think there is a real fund opportunity through Employment and Social Development Canada to increase pre-apprenticeship programs and other opportunities for skills attainment for prisoners and former prisoners who are now in the community. I think that there are real opportunities. You know, I got to tell you, the construction trade is not that fussy about whether somebody has a criminal background. Many people with criminal backgrounds do get work in the construction trades. And if building is going to be a growth industry, I think we're primed to really get our guys equipped, guys and women, equipped to be able to contribute to that skills shortage. And we should be really pushing that to try and get those skills available to people in prison. and beyond. The next slide is endorsing the Fair Chances movement. So there's quite an elaborate movement out there, which is working with employers to hire people with criminal records. We think that this is a really good idea, that this should be promoted. Not all of the people coming out, are capable of working in the construction industry, which can be pretty easygoing about a criminal record. But there's lots of other types of employment that people could be doing who may not have the physical strength or the capacity or interest or whatever to do the construction work. And this works to work with potential employers to try and get them to support giving people with criminal records an opportunity to work in their trades and their industries. So we think that that's something that we should be pushing for now to really encourage greater opportunities for those. Having a job and having remuneration is, again, like a very significant stabilizing influence for people. So I think that would be good. The surprising thing, the next slide is dealing with essentially education in the prisons. Education, there are some studies that suggest that having completed even one post-secondary education course is a really significant factor in reducing recidivism. And the opportunities for post-secondary education have really declined in the federal prison system, mainly because most of the courses have gone online and correspondence courses are online, and prisoners don't have adequate access to the internet to be able to take advantage of that. Other countries allow prisoners to have access to the internet. We're very keen on getting prisoners access to the internet, but we really think that this would greatly increase opportunities to get skilled trades. It would also have a lot of other positive implications for allowing people to retain their positive social networks with their family, building support with their families, and generally remaining feeling as though they're part of a community of care that they're going to return to. But the educational component is not to be missed either. So internet in the prisons is long overdue. And I think we should be pushing for that as a component of the federal framework to reduce recidivism. The next one is providing uninterrupted health care. So as I mentioned to you before, I don't like that exclusion. And we are pressing that the Canada Health Act be amended to remove the exclusion of federal prisoners from universal health care, so that there are no interruptions in their coverage when they're released. We also think that it will greatly facilitate if they have ongoing healthcare coverage. We're not saying that CSC loses its responsibility to provide healthcare while they're in the prison system, but if they need to be transferred to a community healthcare facility because they've been stabbed or they have a health condition that requires treatment that the CSC can't provide, that would now be covered by their OHIP care or whatever provincial health care coverage they have. That would greatly, in our view, change the reluctance of the healthcare providers in CSC to get people out for treatment before they're released into the community. So I was dealing with this guy, very strong, very long parole ineligibility dates. He needed hip replacement treatment. And basically, a CSC was telling him he'd have to wait until he got parole to get the hip replacement. So he's going to come out hurting, needing immediate surgery, and really handicapped in terms of his reintegration back into the community. If they can get the healthcare that they should be entitled to because of their level of needs and the fact that they're Canadian citizens like the rest of us, then those impediments wouldn't necessarily be there. And I don't think they should be there. Similarly, if they have, and I know that Kim Pate and others have been fighting for this for years, if they have mental health issues that are beyond the capacity, and a lot of them are, of CSC to deal with, they could be placed in, based on the same criteria as the rest of the citizenry, could be placed in a provincial health care mental health facility for treatment. Wouldn't mean that they would step to the front of the line, but they shouldn't be discriminated against in their access to this mental health care. And it should be up to the province to cover the costs of that too. Which we think could save them some money and avoid cuts elsewhere. And we think it's absolutely the right thing to do. But we want people to be in the best possible health when they're going to be released, and not have treatments delayed until they get into the community when they can be done before that, when they should be done before that. And we think that amending that provision could really be significant in terms of promoting health and well-being to prisoners and supporting their reintegration. So those are the things that we think are really significant to be pressing for as part of the federal framework to reduce recidivism. If you can just go to the next slide. We think, as I said before, that reporting requirement on progress over the first 3 years is extremely important. And I think if a public safety was aware that parliamentarians were taking it seriously and were asking questions and maybe even guiding to say, at least let's see what portion of the housing resources are being used for this when you report back next year, it would give a little bit more incentive to public safety to be implementing this framework in a way that starts to deliver some of the opportunities that are out there that could hopefully result in measurable reductions in recidivism. So we have written, and I'm happy to share the letter that we have sent out to a bunch of parliamentarians, asking them, essentially where the report is, and if they hadn't received the report yet, could they ask about these items? I'm hoping that will help. But I would really welcome your views on that. I think the next slide, I actually indicate what it is that were the key components in our letter to parliamentarians. Yeah, I did. So why don't we go there? Okay, so we want to know how they're going to measure effectiveness of the federal framework to reduce recidivism. So what is their measure of recidivism? And we need to have that in place so that we can see year-over-year changes. We'd like to ask them what pilot projects have been initiated and what standardized and evidence-based programs to reduce recidivism have been implemented as required by that particular section of the statute. We would like them to provide access to, the statute requires them to provide access to adequate and ongoing resources, as well as employment opportunities for those reintegrating from prison back into the communities. And that's required in the bill. We'd like to see what they've done to deliver that. What support has been delivered to faith-based communities, faith-based and community initiatives that aim to rehabilitate people. And, I think many of us are hopeful that any kind of sustaining funding that we've had from public safety to do that function is not going to be cut as a result of those program reductions. But I think many of us are worried about where the government is going to find 15% reductions, and that should be something that they're looking at. And where are they on the review and implementation of international best practices related to the reduction of recidivism? Now, none of those requirements have a timeline, so they can say, oh, we're getting to them. But I think unless somebody is prodding them to say, what have you done? When can we expect to see that? They're going to just ignore the statutory requirements and kind of give us whatever it is they have done. And so what you're going to see, and we gave them some credit and some praise for this, is those doubling down, or at least pulling out elements of the Indigenous justice strategy and the Black justice strategy that might have any kind of relation to this, but it's work that they were doing anyway. And so they're just counting it towards the federal framework to reduce recidivism. And I think that's not enough. I think they do need to do a lot more in order to be compliant with the statutory requirements, and in order to deliver what this government is saying is one of their priorities, which is to combat crime, and reducing recidivism certainly combats crime. So that's it for me. I may have gone on quite a bit, and I apologize for that, but I am grateful for your time, and I look forward to the discussion that we might have now.
Thank you, Catherine.
Susan.
Thanks, Catherine. Maybe we'll take down the slides and stop the screen share there so we can spot as many hands as possible. I know that we also asked for some questions in advance. So Catherine, if there's a preference to sort of dive into a few of those first, and then we can see what's left after that.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the first questions that we received from folks in advance of the webinar today was around whether or not there are any current initiatives that are giving Catherine hope that the government could look to build on through the federal framework to reduce recidivism. And I mean, I'm starting with that one as I think you've touched on a lot of the next steps and what's possible, but I think your answer to that can maybe summarize some hopes for people right now. That was question 4 that you had provided on your list.
Yeah, do you want me to take a stab at answering that?
Yeah, go for it. I thought you did already. So
I thought I sort of did. I mean,
yeah.
I think we need to press, and I think we need
Yeah.
to press with parliamentarians, and I think the opportunity to do that is now.
Yeah. Great. There was, sorry, Catherine, just making sure you have access to the questions and comments that you provided in advance. Do you have those
I do
handy?
have them. I do have
Okay.
them on my phone here.
Okay, lovely. I'm gonna go to one that I thought was kind of a question that challenges the rhetoric that we hear a lot in the news sometimes, which is why are repeat offenders arrested and charged and released the same day oftentimes? Slap on the wrist and out to do the same crime. And so I think it's probably not exclusive to this person who asked the question, but we sometimes see that come out in the news and
Yeah.
conversation. So I thought yeah, you might want to address that kind of context.
Yeah. I mean, I think we John Howard Society of Ontario has done a lot of work on basically the remand stuff. And I think it is that collection of people who are unhoused, battling mental health issues and addictions, maybe, who commit a lot of visible crime, like graffiti and pooping on the street and this kind of thing, which really irritates the neighbors and the kids and whatnot. But it isn't sufficient to really warrant detaining somebody in custody after they've been picked up by the police. And I think that's where that catch and release phrase is really coming from. I mean, for those of us who are familiar with people who are coming out of federal prisons who are under conditions, it's if they're breached, they're back in. They're not out the next day. I mean, there's it would be nice if there was a little bit of a trial period to figure out why the suspension would be a little more effective than the revocation, a little more opportunity to get people out if they've just been had their parole suspended. But it certainly doesn't apply to the more serious prisoners who've done a significant amount of time. So I think one of the things that we argue is you really need to focus what the measure is to the seriousness. And you need to find really effective alternatives to people who don't need or would be counterproductive to community safety, to be placing them in detention centers or placing them back into a prison for a breach.
Yeah.
I think we really need to work on that.
Sure. Thank you, Catherine. I saw a hand up, I think, from Dennis. I don't know if that hand is still up, but please, Dennis, if you still have that question, go ahead.
It's not a question. Thank you. One of the last slides, and I'm sorry I was late to this. I think I missed a lot of good stuff. I was at another John Howard presentation on transitional housing, and I kind of had anyway.
I'm sure it was excellent too.
It was. and it was based in Brockville and Kingston. But I'll get to my point. So we being the Salvation Army Correctional and Justice Services in Kingston, received some funding through the policy development program from public safety to do a 5-year pilot. The aim is to see if we can chip away at recidivism, but it's focused on seniors, and the program's called Assisting Seniors After Prison.
Great.
And our first evaluation is coming out soon, so the numbers are naturally small because it's only focused on people releasing to Kingston, which isn't a popular destination for some people coming out of federal prison for some reason. But we've got, around 20 clients. We've had some people program complete. But I think the main thing we've discovered is housing first is essential. So I like what's going on in Brockville, by the way. But also, it is hard to measure recidivism in short chunks because we're looking, especially with an aging population, looking at longer term. Because I know a guy that was out for 10 years and went back, and it was a case of a new charge. It wasn't just a breach. So we probably all have stories like that. But yeah, it's hard to measure. And you're right that the framework doesn't really explain how we should measure it apart from, are they out and for how long, I guess? And what's a reasonable amount of time? Is it forever? Yeah. And just one final comment.
Yeah.
Breaching on things that aren't technically against the law is a bit of a problem.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I agree with you.
Yeah. I think that's important. The interesting thing about recidivism, it's usually post sentence completion that you're looking at. But because many of us are very interested in ensuring that lifers are included in that, because there's a lot of misperceptions about how dangerous lifers are, when in fact their recidivism rates are really low. So we need to, some important data needs to be included in there, right? Whatever we're looking at, needs to work.
Thanks. Fallon, I see a hand raised.
Hi, everyone. My apologies for being late as well. I've read a lot of the material and I absolutely agree with everything that's being said, but there's a piece that when we're looking at if we want to reduce recidivism for everybody, I think we should consider, in part at least, that the release plan is a social contract that comes with the fiduciary responsibility for that contract to be supported. And when parole districts undermine the release plan and simply don't support it, and it alters the outcome of the rest of your life, there's a huge opportunity for people to break in so many ways. I've personally experienced the implication of no contact orders when there's absolutely no contact order in existence from the courts or parole boards.
Yeah.
And a parole officer is not allowed to do that. So there's other complications, I think, that are not really in the entire conversation that need to be imported into it. If we really want to use real numbers and represent the harm that's happening that drives people back into those places they're comfortable with, these circumstances need to be brought to the surface. That contract we give to the parole board is the only thing that gets us out. Without it, we don't get out. I spent 22 years behind the wire, and it's small compared to others, but I know those challenges.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I think that's very wise. That's a good comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Fallon. I'm sure we could talk about this for another hour easily, but we just have a few minutes left. So I'm going to give the last question to Lindsay, who's raised something in the chat, which is, how can we address parole officers sending people back over silly reasons, such as bad attitude, talking with others who have records, which could be friends or family, or putting people in timeouts because they are doing too well, or speaking out publicly against CSC?
Yeah,
Maybe it's about framing it through sort of what is the parole officer's role in meaningfully contributing to this federal framework?
Yeah. What they're doing by sending people back when they really don't need to be back in terms of public safety is actually endangering public safety, because they're going to be disenchanted, they're going to be angry, they're going to be hopeless. None of it is good. None of it is good. So we really need to, I don't know, it's a good thing. It's something really to think about. How do we crack that nut? Should there be something other than a parole board review of breaches to see, or potential breaches or alleged breaches that justifies the return? I mean, should there be some independent supportive agency that's looking into that?
Yeah. So I know there's more questions coming in the chat. Before we lose a lot of people, I do just want to say quickly a thank you to Catherine and everyone who has been able to attend. We're happy to keep the line open for a few extra minutes. I do want to just put in, I'll have one of my colleagues put in the link for a evaluation. For anybody who knows me knows I like a good evaluation for a post-webinar kind of debrief of what you thought about how we can improve for future ones that we're looking to hold. And to sort of Dennis's point earlier about measurement, we are excited that the next webinar in our series, which will focus on defining and measuring recidivism, will feature a presentation by someone from the Department of Public Safety's Research Division, and will unpack how recidivism should and can be defined and measured in Canada in a way that is effective and supports our long-term objectives around community safety and crime prevention. And that one is scheduled for October 15th at the same time. I'm not sure they'll have all of the answers, but I do hope that we'll have a good conversation there with them. And so hopefully, Catherine, I will be sure to share your points on measurement with them as well. And we'll send up a follow-up email after today's session with the recording of this session, the link to the post-webinar survey, and the link for our next webinar's registration. So I did just want to get that in before we lose people at 2 o'clock. Catherine, I don't know if you're able to see some of the comments and questions in the chat there that I've seen sort of trickling in, but I'm happy to leave the line open for an extra few minutes if that helps folks. I see one there from Farhat. How can we advocate for more resources for CRF so there is more capacity for them to receive released prisoners, particularly those with serious mental health illnesses?
I think that's a very good question, right? I mean, what I have found is that I'm doing a lot of work with people who have been in prolonged solitary confinement, and their mental health is generally not strong. That doesn't, I don't care, it really does something terrible to people. And some of them have asked to be placed in, as they're coming out, place where they can get some mental health support. To get their feet on the ground and whatnot. But people, I take your point, Farah, that we need to have capacity to deal with people who have the mental health challenges that many of the prisoners have. Otherwise, they're not coming up. They're not coming out. So we need to, John Howard does have one house which deals with people who are on NCR, not criminally responsible reintegration trajectory. So they're dealing with people who have mental health issues. And the person who runs it says it's the easiest CRF he's ever been in, or CRF-like facility he's ever been in, because everybody's compliant. They just take their meds, everything's fine. It's really a low-key, easy thing to do. But if we're not providing that, then a lot of people who could come out will not come out. And these are people who are, particularly marginalized.
Yeah. Thanks, Catherine. The one thing that really stands out to me about the framework is that the 5 pillars really are things that are important for anyone to have, and are reasonable expectations that any person would have to be stable and well in their community. And so I think it's, those are the pieces that I think we tend to forget about when we say, this is something that these folks should have. I mean, this is something that anybody would want to have in terms of positive support network, healthcare, education, employment, and housing. And so I do think, our resistance to making those things available is puzzling at times, but it's voices like yours that help to keep it on the radar. And I just really want to take the opportunity to say thank you for your advocacy and your your dedication to this particular effort, because I think it would maybe not be getting as much attention as it is. And so I look forward to mobilizing with as many people as I can who've participated today and making this recording available to others, and seeing what we can continue to do to hold people accountable for implementation of this legislation in a meaningful way. I think we'll probably leave it there. Anyone else who wants to get in touch, please feel free to connect with the SLSC team and register for our upcoming webinars so we can continue on with this conversation. Thanks so much, everyone.
Anita, for having this. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Farhad.
you.
Good to see you.